Mary and Rose win a butler in a charity raffle. No, not Mr. Belvedere, but the next best thing. Battle of the Network shows. Join Rick Brooks and Mike Kogel as they explore the TV of the 70s and 80s through hand-picked episodes of their favorite and not-so-favorite series.
Welcome to Battle of the Network shows. I'm Mike.
And I'm Rick. Hello, everyone.
And today we're doing a listener request. We're going to be talking about 227.
Yes, not show number 227.
Not
I don't
yet.
think we're quite there yet, are we?
No, I don't think so. I've lost count, but
you know what? I'm gonna have to redo a count so we gotta celebrate our 200th episode.
Yeah, we're inching our way there.
Yeah, I panicked that we blew past it. We're already up to 227, but you're talking about the sitcom named 227.
Yeah, it would have been cool if we had saved 227 for the 227th episode, but I think this is a good time to do it.
Yeah, I think so.
Request. So
the people demanded it.
Yes, the people demanded
it. I wouldn't want our listeners to wait, possibly another full season or two for 227. I'm glad to bring it now.
Yeah, and by the people we mean Jackee.
Yes.
She called us up.
And what she wants, she gets.
That's right.
I would be delighted if she did listen to our podcast. I don't have any reason to think that she does not, but I don't have verification that she does. But She was not actually the one who requested this episode, Mike.
Oh, okay.
I'm sure she'll be thrilled by it. I think we'll have good things to say about her. But actually is my cousin Kevin, also a friend of the show. He suggested we cover this one. And you know what? I'm glad he did, because I actually, we've got a little bit of a personal history with this show. One thing that comes to mind when I think of this is, of course, the NBC sitcom, 1980s, Marla Gibbs. It was set in Washington, D.C., which was kind of cool. And I remember a couple of years, my cousin and I went down to the D.C. area for an event called the Touchdown Club, an organization that gave out awards and kind of raised charity by giving out awards to mostly people in the sports field, but also have I think Colin Powell was there one year, and have some big shots in the D.C. area as well. So, Kevin and I came down with, his dad, my grandfather, my Uncle Bill, who was, sort of running the club for a while, and different mix of people, but it was just kind of cool. And I just kind of remember for some reason one year, like, just seeing that 227 was on, the show set in DC, like, while being in DC, seeing commercials for it. For some reason I thought that was cool. I was easy to please back then, but it was kind of interesting to just see something, a show that wasn't set in New York and Los Angeles, but that was somewhere within driving distance of where I lived, in Pennsylvania at the time. So that was kind of cool. And that was kind of one thing that stood out about 227. But I know my cousin Kevin, he liked it. And, I was talking with him about, Marla Gibbs, and just, maybe the show showed that she could or could not. I mean, there's maybe some debate over that, whether she could carry a show on her own. But it was an interesting program. I remember us just seeing it and just watching local TV. And this won't surprise anybody, but I was sort of, fascinated even then by just different localities and what the TV was like, what they were showing and their promos and that sort of thing. So I just kind of remember watching TV here in DC. And now that I live in the area, the greater DC area, it's no big deal being exposed to those stations. But at the time, it was cool to come down and see, this is like Channel 20 or whatever is going to show this. And then I just remember one thing that was going to be on was Sombra the Spider Woman was going to be on late at night one night they were there. Like, oh, Sombra the Spider Woman.
Wow.
That's even more exciting than 227. But
we don't get that high class fare anymore.
No, we don't. I don't think so. But yeah, so, Kevin, thanks for suggesting this one. And, we can get into it a bit. He also suggested the episode we're going to talk about. And I think he chose an interesting one that I had never seen. But I did watch this off and on Saturday nights during its original run. I think mostly probably like the first season or two. And after that, not so much. But I did have exposure to this show when it was first on. Yeah,
I remember it, because it was part of that 227, Amen, Golden Girls, well, an empty nest. But I watched the other three, some. And it was exciting that year. I guess they premiered the same year, right? 227 and Amen.
I believe so, yeah.
Right after the Jeffersons had sort of ended abruptly, and getting to see those guys again in different contexts. But honestly, I didn't remember a lot about it. Coming into it, just a general thing of Marla Gibbs and Olivia from Sesame Street.
Yeah, right.
And I mean, I remember all the main characters. I don't think until recently I would have known, oh, Regina King was on it, but you can't forget Sandra, of course. Hard to forget. And I certainly remember Jackee Fever.
Yeah.
And Pearl and Al Williams as Lester. It's a good memorable cast. I definitely wasn't watching in the later seasons, when they brought in other people, and season 4 when they had the genius child around.
Yeah.
The stoop of 227 that played a big part, at least in the first couple seasons, stood out in my mind, partly because it looks so much like the stoop from Sesame Street. And
it sure did, yeah.
And there's an actress from Sesame Street, so that's confusing. But now, because you mentioned the Washington, D.C. thing, I did want to mention three things about that. One is the hilarious shot in the opening credits where there's like an apartment building looking out on the mall, the Washington Monument.
Yeah.
Where is that?
What a view.
Yeah. And two, I don't know, other than seeing a reference in Wikipedia saying it was in Northeast D.C., I don't really have a sense of exactly where it's supposed to be in D.C. And for those of you who don't know, D.C. is divided into 3 areas. The street names indicate this. There's Northwest, which is the bulk of the city, really. And there's Southeast and there's Northeast.
Mm-hmm.
And I feel like I've been to Northeast a handful of times, other than passing through.
Right.
But if it is, that's that's a cool detail. And the other thing is, and I feel like maybe this has come up in some other context here. It's nice to see a show set in DC that has nothing to do with politics.
Yeah, that's a good point.
Because there's the whole, it's a company town and everybody's involved in politics and this and that, and everybody knows everybody, and
Mm-hmm.
it kind of ignores the rest of the city and the fact that there is this very large working class and middle class black population. So all of that I think is really nice to see, even though, except for on rare occasions, I don't think it being in DC really matters one way or another to the show. But
that's right. And in many ways it is sort of the glimpses of DC atmosphere are a lot of pre-gentrification too. And it's certainly not showing, some of the grittier side of DC, but it doesn't have to. On the other hand, it like you said, it is cool to have a different setting. And even if sometimes it's limited to, the characters talking about going to a Redskins game, see the Washington Redskins football team or something like that. Every now and then you get references to things here and there. That's kind of cool. It's really not reliant on the show, but it's just enough. And, for me as a kid, just seeing the theme song and establishing that setting was kind of enough to mark it as like, okay, this is something a little bit different.
Yeah, I think it's a nice touch. And of course, I didn't know this either, but it's based on a play that Marla Gibbs appeared in and eventually got developed into a series. But, with the assist of Norman Lear and Brandon Tartikoff.
Yeah.
I was watching an interview with her today, and she said Norman Lear was interested in trying to put it on Broadway, and someone else she wanted to do it as some kind of movie, like a TV movie.
Mm-hmm.
And then Tartikoff suggested a series, and they changed a lot of the elements of the play. But I liked getting that information because as I was watching some of the early episodes, especially, it had that feeling of a play. Like you could imagine that stoop being the main set of a play.
Yes. The early episodes are much more focused on stoop culture.
Yes.
Which I really enjoy that, and
yeah.
It can be entertaining, but that's sort of like window on the world kind of thing of, the residents just seeing the world go by and commenting on it.
Yeah.
Kind of, it is kind of a throwback to earlier sitcoms, which were
Mm-hmm.
more stage bound by necessity
Yeah.
and didn't open things up as much. But it does seem like pretty early on they got away from that. They would have maybe a scene or two in the stoop, per episode, but definitely not relying on it as much as they did in the early episodes.
The first few times I saw Pearl walking around instead of just looking out her window,
Yeah.
it was a little distracting.
Yeah.
It was like seeing a Muppet walk.
Yeah, it's like a Bert and Ernie,
Yeah.
like walking on the street or something like that.
Right.
I like that you mentioned that Christine Houston was the one who wrote the play, and that became the show 227. And the whole thing's kind of interesting. She never really seems to get much credit or just mentioned, but she did develop a lot of these concepts. I was watching an interview with Michael Moye, one of the Television Academy interviews, and talking about his role in the series. And I was glad I did, because the show is credited to Bill Boulware, a producer, and C.J. Banks. And C.J. Banks is an alias for Michael Moye. Now, Michael Moye had worked on the Jeffersons and Good Times, so he had that Norman Lear relationship. And he was brought in to kind of help develop this, but apparently they just changed what his vision was for it. And he went with a pseudonym. He had his name taken off, or his real name taken off, but he gets that like created by credit that lasts for the whole show, which is kind of interesting.
I was wondering why he had the alias.
Yeah, and he went on to create Married with Children.
Yeah.
Co-create Married with Children. And one of the things I thought was interesting was in the interview, he was saying that Marla Gibbs, I mean, he didn't name her at first, but then I think later on he said something that became clear. Marla Gibbs' vision was to have more like social commentary.
Mm-hmm.
And he just wanted, he didn't want any, he didn't want politics, and he just wanted to go for more laughs or something, which is interesting. And I thought that was kind of interesting because I don't think of 227 as particularly strong on the social commentary, especially after, some of the earlier episodes.
No, it seems like it went more his direction.
Yeah. And whereas Married with Children, I mean, clearly that they were going for laughs, but you could argue in some ways that was a very political show and kind of the viewpoint it took. I think if you asked a lot of people, what was the attitude was, like a certain, not necessarily partisan, but had a certain political attitude. It seemed like, and kind of the sacred cows that it thought it was going after, or that went after, So yeah. I find that interview very interesting, but he just wasn't on board with the vision for the show, so he left and put a pseudonym on there. And
because the Marla Gibbs interviews I watched were the Academy ones too, and she talked about how she didn't get an executive producer credit, but she was one, and she had script approval and even got involved in sort of editorial decisions and trying to make it a better show. But it does seem reasonably quickly to become way more sitcom-y,
right?
In like capital S sitcom-y than frankly I expected. I mean, remember the Sandra character being kind of over the top, but I expected it to not be the socially conscious part, but just to be a sort of grounded thing, which I think in season 1 it mostly is. And I mean, I think it's kind of like the quality of it is the best when it's not wacky and it's not social commentary focused, when it's just their lives.
You're right.
And, kind of small stakes, but I sure do enjoy when it's wacky. And then there's the odd episode where it's both wacky and a bad social commentary.
Yes.
The one with Lou Albano.
Yeah, that's right. And one thing too is that I think might color our perceptions now, and no pun intended, is that there weren't all that many black sitcoms on at the time. In the 90s, and with more networks getting involved and more programming choices, it became a little bit more commonplace to see shows centered around African American characters. But it was still relatively new when the show debuted in 1985. You had Cosby Show and some others like Webster maybe around this time. And as a result, it might be a little bit more difficult to think about, okay, what was it like as a show, as opposed to thinking of it as quote unquote like a black show, which in some ways they did get into issues like racism and more uniquely African American topics, but in many ways, like you said, it just kind of went on to become more of a standard family sitcom.
Yeah, well, at some point NBC had this, Amen, Cosby, in a Different World.
That's right.
Which is a pretty big chunk of their sitcom lineup. But I think I was thinking about that recently. I heard an interview with Quinta Brunson of Abbott Elementary and talking about how that show, she was trying to make it a show that appealed to a broad audience, the way sitcoms used to. And I was thinking about the difference, that even if you had a show with a largely black cast like this, that the shows generally appealed to a broad audience. Whereas today, a lot of things are very niche.
That's right, yeah.
For what, the myriad reasons that they are. But you can go to BET and watch a whole lot of shows with black characters, but
right.
They don't necessarily feel targeted to a broad audience. And I don't know, maybe that's fine. Maybe it's not. I feel like, having, as long as you're not, ignoring the fact that the characters are black and things like that, I think it's a good thing for us. I think we talked about that with the Jeffersons even, or something, for us as an audience to see whether you're black and feeling represented or white and connecting with people, seeing the humanity of people that in some cases you might have been taught aren't as human or something. Like, I think that's all good. And I feel like this show there's some subtle stuff that is still, it's not hitting you over the head with these are black people, but there are lots of things, whether it's just in the way they talk to each other or like a lot of the artwork in their apartment and just the idea, it's people living their lives. It's not like everybody would be talking about social issues all day long anyway.
and it's certainly like, like a middle class, solidly middle class, if not upper middle class perspective too.
Yeah, I think. I mean, they're not the Huxtables, but
no,
they're
but they're comfortable. Lester, is a businessman, a contractor. From watching like a bunch of episodes, I don't really see them worrying about money. It's like more in a classic sitcom way of like, Mary wants to spend too much money on a dress, which annoys Lester, as opposed to like something like Good Times, where they were living paycheck to paycheck a lot of times. That's kind of like the vision we had like by this point in the 80s, after like Good Times had long been off the air. The Jeffersons, which kind of got into issues more of class because, George was like sort of obsessed with it. That was, off the air, as we noted. And some of those shows were left. And then you got into sort of like the Cosby Show and post-Cosby Show things were more like middle class but not necessarily talking about it. Even like Different Strokes would be going off the air right kind of around the time when 227 is coming on the air. I guess it's kind of like this upper 80s kind of transition period, it seems like, kind of in retrospect, before you get, just kind of other stuff coming in the 90s.
Homeboys in Outer Space.
Yes. One other thing I want to mention before I forget here is talking about when the show debuted. I would love to find this promo, and I haven't been able to find it yet online. Please, if somebody knows where it is or can steer me to it, please let me know. I remember when the show first debuted, and I think it was right before it came on. I must have been watching the first episode, because I remember, our friend of the show, Amy, knows well Danny Dark, NBC voiceover artist, and voice of many things. Superman for a while in the cartoons, right? Yeah. Budweiser beer. Extremely talented voiceover artist, narrator, announcer. But he did a promo. It was sort of like in a quasi-rap. Do you remember this?
No.
It started out, it was like, but he was just kind of doing it like in a sing-songy rhythm. So it was just like, 227 is a comedy with Marla Gibbs and her family. And then there were a couple other lines, and then it ended with 227 is the place to be next on NBC. Boy, I would love to hear that again.
Oh boy.
Yeah. I mean, it wasn't quite like what we're going to talk about in this episode, as far as like comical failed appropriation.
Yeah.
But it's sort of like set the stage for something like that. But boy, yeah, I would just love to see it again. He sold it well. I can assure you.
He was a pro.
He could do anything. Yeah, even that.
I'd like to hear the outtakes. The conversations they had about that. Or did he just walk in and do it?
I don't know. I like to think he just went in and I like to think he freestyled it, actually, the whole promo. They just gave him a general concept and he rolled with it. Another thing, well, maybe we might get into this along the way, but one thing I'm curious about, Mike, did Marla Gibbs in that interview, did she talk about the rumored feud with her and Jackee?
She didn't, but I watched one of those Today Show reunions from 2010, and Jackee said something about that they had gone full circle. Okay. And they are great friends now.
Okay, so they quashed the beef.
Yeah, I think they quashed the beef. And the people that were there, of course some of them had passed away, but were, just talking, but said very lovingly that she was insane.
That who was insane?
Jackee.
Oh, okay.
In a good way.
Yeah, I think she's admitted. I think I have seen things where she's admitted that she wasn't the best soldier all the time there.
I mean, she wasn't a known quantity yet, and to suddenly be a star.
Yeah.
I could see it going to your head.
Right, and she didn't drop her last name until the show became popular, right?
Right. Yeah.
So that's a sign right there. When you start going by one name.
Yeah, either she decided it on her own or somebody gave her some advice.
Yeah. You can see tension there because it's the classic case between the anchor of the show and then maybe the show getting away from her a little bit. The star wanting, being a de facto showrunner, executive producer, and wanting to maintain some control while somebody else, getting like the big laugh lines, applause. I'm kind of making it sound like it's a total jealousy thing, but I'm sure there's more to it than that. But
yeah, I think I don't know. It's understandable.
Yeah. I mean, watching 227 in general, I don't get the sense of a show where it doesn't show on camera to me a show where Marla Gibbs is hogging all the laugh lines.
No, I feel like it's an ensemble.
Yeah, if anything, I think she's willing to give them out, and which is interesting because, of course, Florence on the Jeffersons was the scene stealer on that show. I mean, Marla Gibbs was the one stealing scenes from everybody else.
And didn't she briefly left the Jeffersons, right?
Yes, very briefly.
Much like Jackee.
Yeah.
Well, Jackee didn't really come back, I guess, or not full time, but she got her own pilot, which is not good.
Yeah. I should mention here, too, Kevin, I don't think he'd mind me revealing this, but Kevin used to do a little impersonation of the Jackee voice, too. I think the Mary, 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 which was quite amusing. And I'm not going to do it now, but Kevin, another shout out to you for that. Made me laugh many a time.
I'm not going to try either, but I certainly found myself attempting while watching to repeat some of her lines.
Yes. And she did become a cultural phenomenon for a while.
Yeah.
Probably. Now, 227 was a solid ratings performer, especially its first couple seasons. But yeah, she became like the breakout sensation of the show for sure. Although, of course, Regina King, then like you sort of alluded to it, like years later, she's become an acclaimed actress. And it's, at some point, I can't remember where it was that I thought, oh, wow, that's the girl from 227 is like a serious actress now.
Right. Yeah. I think I already said I didn't put it together because I remember. I think she's in Poetic Justice, but I didn't recognize her in that. But she stood out in that movie. Well, and she's in Boys in the Hood. And,
yeah.
And of course, who can forget Countess Vaughn?
No. Well, I got to be honest, I did forget her. I forgot that she was on this show until I happened to start an episode up and she was on there. I'm like, wait a minute, who is this character? And it's one of those unusual things where when I looked it up, it's like, oh, she actually was only on one season, right? So she didn't even last to the end of the show. Right.
Yeah. Yeah. She was the genius kid. And I mean, she did do a pretty good Sandra impression.
Yeah.
But.
Yeah. For what I've seen of her, she was not as obnoxious as, we've talked about the precocious kid character can be. She was surprisingly, non-obnoxious, but still inessential in my opinion.
Yeah. I mean, the kids weren't a huge part of it anyway. So.
Right.
Why do you need a cute one?
No. To me, you had everything you needed with... I just like seeing the grown-ups, and I like the kids as props for the grown-ups to get mad, upset about.
Yeah.
Because to me, the main character in the show is Lester, as played by the great Hal Williams.
Yeah.
Who I think is probably one of the underrated TV dads. The more I watch this show, I think he should get his due. He's a great provider, a loving husband. Mm-hmm. He's there for his kids, and at the end of the day, he just seems like a cool guy to hang out with.
And I think he has the best line of this episode. I'm not going to repeat it because it's a swear word.
Okay.
But there's a scene where he just offhandedly says something. Just the way he says it really made me.
Oh, yeah. I think I know what you're talking about.
Yeah.
Like, yeah. Okay. Maybe we can allude to it later.
Yeah.
One other thing about 227 is, in recent years, it's been easy to see. It was easy for us to watch. At the time you're listening to this, of course, it's live wherever you are, but...
Yes.
You might have to look for it a little bit, but it should be on streaming somewhere.
Yes, but it was in a very handy commercial-free environment while we were watching it.
That's the way I like it. Yep.
Yes, indeed. You mentioned the opening, the theme song. We should mention that Marla Gibbs sang the theme song.
Yeah, possibly her best contribution to the show. Is the theme song. And I don't mean that as a negative. I just mean that it's a great theme song.
It is a good theme song, and I where would we rank it compared to Linda Lavin singing the Alice theme song?
Well, I don't know. This song does certainly establish that, it's folksy in the right ways. It lets you know that it is about family. And like you said, with some of the visuals, you could be expecting like a more like insider DC type thing. And the song lets you know right away that, no, it's not really that kind of show.
Yeah, it's family.
Yeah, family and home.
Yeah, and the times when characters sing on the show, which didn't seem to happen that often, but the times I saw it, it wasn't like embarrassing the way it normally is.
That's high praise indeed.
Yeah, even when they were singing with the Temptations. The episode was a little embarrassing, but them singing, they sounded good. It was the three main ladies. They sounded good.
I mean, the show does seem to rely on gimmicks quite a bit, for better or for worse. Many sitcoms do, and this one was on five seasons, so you can't blame it too much for doing that. But, well, I mean, I'm sure we'll talk about it later. It's a fun show.
Yeah.
Is it one of the best, sitcoms we've covered? No, it's not, but I think we've said this before about other types of shows. I'll say it again. The world needs B sitcoms, too. This is a solid, especially the first couple seasons, it's a solid fill out your lineup, get good ratings, get the job done, and it's an easy watch.
Yeah. And I think it is one that means a lot to a lot of people who grew up with it. I get that impression. Maybe I'm wrong.
Well, I hope not, but I do think...
No, I get that impression.
It probably hasn't gotten the due it deserves. I do think, you're right. Probably a lot of people grew up on it. This was like kind of the glory years of NBC.
Mm-hmm.
But a lot of times people will think about Family Ties, Cosby Show, Cheers, Night Court, which we talked about earlier this season. And 227 does not necessarily mention the same breath. And maybe it's a tier below the shows I mentioned, but it deserves a spot in the discussion. It had a good run.
Yeah, and that, like I said, that Saturday night for a while was a pretty good block.
It sure was. And, we'll find out when we talk about what was on this particular night in the episode we talked about.
All right. Is that a segue?
I think it's a segue.
All right.
We're going to talk about Season 3's The Butler Did It, which premiered March 12th, 1988 on NBC. And NBC was the clear winner ratings-wise of this night. So 8 o'clock was The Facts of Life. Now, 1988, but yeah, Facts of Life was still on. And on Saturday night, that kind of surprises me a little bit. 8:30, 227, which we'll talk about. 9 o'clock, The Golden Girls, which was a huge hit at this time. 9:30, Amen. And at 10 o'clock, Hunter, one show that I think that one gets forgotten a little bit when you talk about the Saturday night NBC lineup. But one thing that stands out, and just kind of looking at the ratings, is, this was like a viable night of television and maybe the last gasp of Saturday night being a viable night of television. And when we talk about how I didn't really watch the later seasons of 227, I think part of it was, I wasn't watching as much TV on Saturday nights as I got older. And if I was, it was, maybe sports or something like that. I remember watching more college football or, maybe some kind of sporting event if I was watching TV at all on a Saturday night. ABC had Dolly at 8, her variety show that didn't last very long. At 9 o'clock, O'Hara with Pat Morita. Followers of Battle of the Network shows in our Facebook group will know that I have a Karate Kid Pat Morita action figure, which I like to think is an O'Hara action figure with one arm inexplicably missing, but still I like to think it's O'Hara. 10 o'clock, Spencer for Hire. CBS had at 8 o'clock The Magic of David Copperfield. Something involving the Bermuda Triangle. I don't know if he made the Bermuda Triangle disappear, or if he disappeared in the Bermuda Triangle, or if he solved the issue of the Bermuda Triangle, but there was some kind of magic involved. 9 o'clock, Tour of Duty. 10 o'clock, West 57th, the news magazine show that I think we came up earlier in this season.
Yes, it did, yeah.
Now, but I'm not done yet, because the Fox network was around in 1988, Mike. 8 o'clock, they had Second Chance, Matthew Perry, a sitcom. 8:30, Women in Prison. The title pretty much says it all, that sitcom. 9 o'clock, The New Adventures of Beans Baxter. And at 9:30, Mr. President, the sitcom with George C. Scott and Madeline Kahn. So that was Fox, and NBC was a clear winner.
What was it? The New Adventures of Beans Baxter?
Yes, which was kind of like he was like a teenage secret agent. So it's kind of like a lighthearted spy show. But
we know that wasn't good because it has new in the title.
That's right. Although maybe it gets an exemption because there wasn't an Adventures of Beans Baxter before.
Yeah, they were going to do that later as a prequel, the Saturday morning prequel.
So that was what was on this night, and so we're right almost smack dab in the middle of 227's run, which would go 5 years, 1985 to 1990. And I did want to point out, like I said, it was a solid hit, and it was in the top 20 its first couple seasons. And then its fifth season, it really sunk a lot, and the show was, declining by then. But it was a solid part of NBC Saturday Night for quite a while. It did win one Emmy, and it wasn't Hal Williams that won it. It was Jackee that won the one Emmy that the show got.
Yeah. And I just want to point out that Amen premiered the season after 227.
Okay.
But also lasted 5 seasons.
So, still, Marla Gibbs alone made it a relatively smooth transition for a shaken nation after the Jeffersons left the air.
Yes.
So, we can take comfort in that.
Right.
And 227 actually premiered as a 9:30 show. And then it moved to 8:30 and 8 o'clock. Again, that seems a little unusual to me. But you can see they had some legacy series like Facts of Life still on. But 227 to me looks like a classic 8 or 8:30 family show to kind of ease people into the night.
I always thought Empty Nest was the 9:30 show.
Yeah.
Because it was edgier.
Yes. Well, Richard Mulligan's eyebrows alone were edgy enough to warrant a later time slot.
That's right. Now I'm thinking almost all those shows had a breakout supporting character, didn't they?
Yeah.
You had Sandra, and you had the daughter on Amen.
Yes.
And you had Park Overall on...
Oh, yeah. That's right, yeah. I thought you were going to go with David Leisure, but you're right. It was Park Overall.
I guess David Leisure had already broken out, right?
Yeah.
Joe Azusa. Who can forget Joe Azusa?
Right.
Maybe there's a bonus episode we could do on commercial characters like that.
Yeah. I think that'd be a fun one to do. Yeah. Anna Marie Horsford. I was trying to think of her name.
Yeah. And as you said, the episode's called The Butler Did It. And it opens with Mary at home, and Sandra and Pearl come in, and they've got big news. Mary and Rose have won a charity raffle, and it's possible they won a 3-day cruise. That's certainly what they're hoping for. And then Rose comes in, and she's all excited, and Mary's going on about the cruise, and Sandra's going on about it being the Love Boat, and this and that. And it turns out they've won the use of a butler for an entire week. And then, as often happens on the show, someone else comes to the door. And to let them know that there's a fancy British guy outside looking for Mary's apartment. And comes in, and it's a very familiar character actor who was on Seinfeld. And it's the restaurant owner that Jerry tries to help and gets deported instead. I'm forgetting his name. Brian something.
Brian George, I believe.
Brian George, that's right. And so they think he's the butler, obviously. But it turns out he's the employer of the butler, who's donated, Mr. Forsyth, and he's donated Albert's time to this charity. And would you like to let the folks know who's playing the butler?
I would be honored. The butler is played by the great Franklin Cover, who, of course, was Tom Willis on the Jeffersons, and he gets a nice ovation when he enters the scene, does he not?
He does. The audience on 227 is always happy to see someone they know.
Yeah. I mean, there's almost one particular, like, yeah, or something like that, and then, everybody else joining in, but you can hear a few individual reactions. It's very good.
Yeah, and he's snooty right from the start.
If I may interrupt, I want to point out something, because I think it happened a little just before this, is Lester makes a great entrance into the show. Yeah. He comes from off camera with a newspaper in his hand. Uh-huh. So I think you can draw conclusions as to what he was doing and where he's coming from. And it just kind of reminded me of, in a weird way, another Seinfeld connection. It's just another way that this episode reminded me of Seinfeld multiple times.
Yeah.
And one of them was, Lester just coming in, like, not knowing what's going on and just, having to ask questions. And, of course, them giving more information by filling him in. But I just liked it in his bewilderment. And I think this is probably the line that you're talking about where he basically says, "What are we going to do with a butler?"
Oh, no.
Oh.
That's a good one. Although the one I'm thinking also involves the bathroom.
Okay. Yeah.
In fact, it's the very next scene. But before we get to that, just the impression we get from Albert is he doesn't want to be there. And he's been with Brian George's, the family, the Forsyths, for 31 years, but only one of them has been working directly for this Forsyth. The other 30 years were for his father. So the next scene, Lester's walking out of the bathroom in his robe. We'll just say he says, "Dang it." And that was my favorite, the way he says that line.
Ah.
Yeah.
Yes.
And then Albert is right behind him, and he's mad because Albert was in the bathroom with him, and he was drawing his bath. And Lester's like, he's been drawing his bath for his entire life. He doesn't need to do that. And Albert, well, I'll just towel you off. And Lester's not having any of it.
Yeah, Lester says, "You're ticking me off."
That's right. That's a pretty good line.
Yeah. Another thing that I'll point out here for people on the eventual committee that will be listening is, for a while here you had, I believe in the same scene, 3 great mustaches: Brian George, Hal Williams, and Franklin Cover, looking pretty good post Jeffersons, but with a mustache, in this case, helping do the work conveying the snootiness.
Yes. That's a very good point. I'm taking note of it now myself.
Yes, please do. But it was a great, like, multicultural array of mustaches.
Yes.
In one brief segment here in 227, so that was good.
And Lester goes in the bathroom by himself, and then Mary's wondering where all the family pictures have gone. And Albert explains that fashion dictates only one family picture in the drawing room. And Mary says, "Well, fashion doesn't live here." And he says, "Yes, I can see that."
Yeah.
He asks, would Madam like me to do the marketing? And she's like, "That's a good idea, and I'll go to the mall." And he's going to order escargot, foie gras, and caviar. And she's like, maybe order peanut butter and jelly and a pot roast.
I love the phrase "the marketing," by the way.
Yes, I do too.
Oh, yeah, I need to start using that.
The marketing, and yet it sounds like they're way ahead of the times here. They're just going to order it in.
Yeah, that's right, yeah. Yeah, I don't know. You'd think that, some areas of D.C. might have been food deserts for a while, yet others were way ahead and had delivery service.
That's right. It does seem like Albert, besides being snooty, just doesn't understand how the other half lives anymore. He's been a butler so long, he's forgotten.
Yeah, and getting back to the issue of class, which I brought up earlier, this kind of this episode kind of points out this is one of the episodes where it's sort of more convenient for the Jenkins family to be sort of the other half, like you mentioned, but it's really played for laughs. It's kind of like practical versus snooty as opposed to real issues of like wealth and haves and have-nots.
Yes, inequities. Yeah.
Although I did like that tip about only one family portrait in the drawing room, and that's something that we violate here, and maybe I should look into that. I don't know, maybe we're overdoing it on our family wall, but
I don't know.
Of course, this was 30-some years ago, so maybe things have changed.
Right. How many toys are allowed in the drawing room?
Well, let's not even go there.
And then Rose arrives. Now, this is only the first morning after Albert has arrived. So probably not even 24 hours. But Rose asks how it's going with Albert. Mary's like, she says she would have rather won the canned ham. And Rose, despite them being best friends, they often get into these little tiffs about things. And she thinks Mary's kind of faking her frustration to get Albert all to herself, like to convince Rose that she won't want him there. Yeah, but Mary's more than happy to hand him off.
That's right.
Let Rose find out for herself.
I just thought of something. Albert, says something to Lester like, "Did you enjoy, something about sleeping on the couch?" And Lester says, "Well, yeah, I almost got no worries. I almost got an hour's sleep." Well, where did Mary sleep?
I think that's later, right?
Okay, I apologize.
That's still valid. That is a valid question, though.
But we did say, yes, I was thinking about that because I was thinking of the scene where Albert says, "Well, if you'll be good enough to show me to my room," and Lester says, "Oh, you're standing in it," then right in the living room.
Right.
So as far as I know, they have, Brenda's got a bedroom, and Mary and Lester have a bedroom.
Yeah, I think that's
But we very rarely, if ever, see any rooms except like the living room and the kitchen.
Yeah.
And, if I may step aside for a minute, the laundry room, like downstairs, I kind of like that. And I don't know if that might be something else that they got away from.
Right.
But especially like in the earlier episodes, they went down there quite a bit to like, to be another gathering place, like an indoor gathering place. And there would be like meetings, like the building would conduct their business. And it's kind of like a dumpy looking, laundry room. And it's not great laundry facilities either.
No, and in fact, one episode they had a lot of problems with it.
Yeah.
The one where Rose inherits the building.
Yeah.
Which also includes meetings. Yeah, I like that too. That was a good touch of apartment life.
Yeah.
Yeah, I think, well, in that same, it's a two-parter, but where Rose ends up inheriting the building, they think Sandra is going to do it, and Mary's looking in the paper for 2-bedroom apartments and quoting the outrageous prices.
Yeah.
Which seemed a little, maybe not. They seemed a little high for then.
Yeah.
I mean, they weren't great for now, frankly. But
at
least in some places. I guess around here they might have been pretty good. But so the next scene takes place on the stoop, and Albert is serving tea to Rose and Anna. This might be the only season 3 episode I saw because this other family shows up. This Latina family.
I looked that up and I didn't recognize the character at all, and it seemed like he at least was only in a couple of episodes. So
the father,
the superintendent.
Yeah. And then there's a kid too, Manny.
Yeah. Now Manny, I think, may have been in more episodes, but like his parents, and which is weird. It's the guy that directed Like Water for Chocolate was playing the superintendent.
What?
Yeah, Alfonso Arau. And he's got like a pretty extensive list of like, and he still does like voiceover and stuff. But he's also an acclaimed director. And he had this like mini gig on 227 as the building superintendent. And the way he enters now, you would think he's a regular character, right? I mean, like all of them, seem like that they've been ensconced for a while. But what I saw indicated he was only in 2 episodes. And I believe it because I don't remember seeing him in any other ones.
Right. But they're sitting out there they always sit on milk crates. I like that detail.
Yeah, that's an essential part of stoop culture is, some kind of like regular yet informal seating arrangement.
Yeah. And Albert is serving them high tea. And Rose is like all happy that it's like, being in England. And she tells Albert to serve the donuts. And he's, there are no donuts at high tea, only crumpets. And Anna asks, well, then poke a hole in my crumpet and serve it to me.
Yeah.
And then Mary comes out, and Albert says he made Rose a hair appointment.
Yeah.
She's like, I just got it done. It's like, So Mary's enjoying all this.
Yeah, and he
Enjoying.
says, "Well, you might enjoy having it done by a professional."
Yes.
You know, I was thinking, Albert does seem a little bit out of place, but I don't know if stoop culture was such a big thing in England.
Right. They do have a lot of stoops.
Yeah, but it was more something to like stumble over on your way home, like Andy Capp would,
Yes.
as opposed to hanging out on your stoop. And it might be because of the weather. I don't know. Maybe our English listeners could educate us about stoop culture over there. I'd be interested to hear.
Now I feel like my impression, having spent a little time there, but watching TV also, is that a lot of the houses that would have stoops though would be the fancy houses. Where like a lot of the smaller houses are just you just walk out the door and you're on the sidewalk. Like there's no steps or anything. So maybe the fancy people were on the stoops and used to serving high tea on the stoop.
Right. Whereas it'd be kind of inverted in the United States.
That's right.
That's a good point.
But yes, Mary's enjoying all this, and then because there's a whole thing. He also is like, saying that their pinkies should be up and all this, and he sticks the crumpet on Anna's pinky, but he goes inside, and Rose, they're like, what are we gonna do with this guy for a whole week? And then right as they say that, Sandra comes strutting up the sidewalk. And of course, she's got a million things to do because she's got a big date tonight. And, Rose and Mary kind of play her like a fiddle to get her to take Albert off their hands. Rose suggests, maybe you could take Albert, and Mary pretends to be upset about that. But it works. And frankly, Albert and Sandra get along much better.
Yeah, it seems to be a pretty good fit there.
Yeah. They seem very comfortable.
Yeah.
And so she asks him, they're in her apartment, which we see that a lot too as a set, and asks how she looks, and champagne cork pops out of the bottle, and they start working on what's going to be the signal for him to leave. He's supposed to serve the champagne and the hors d'oeuvres, and then she's like, and then I'll just tell you to scram. I'll give you the signal. What is it? Scram. And he's like, how about the goose liver was delicious? And she likes that. They're going to do that. And so her date arrives, Darren, played by the great Phil Morris, also from Seinfeld, of course. And he's some sort of a rich dude. Not exactly sure what kind of rich dude, but he's a rich dude. He's a society person.
Yeah, and it sort of points out the social climbing aspect of Sandra's character.
Yeah, and she doesn't even wait for to try to actually eat any of the hors d'oeuvres before she's giving the cue, which, of course, Albert isn't taking at all. And then he and Darren start talking about the Cape and bonding and remembering. Darren remembers this woman, Sissy Witherspoon, who he was in love with. But then she got married, and Albert said, oh, no, she got divorced. And he encourages Darren to go to her now. And even Sandra does, which I found a little confusing at first. But then she immediately calls up Sissy's ex, Reggie Poindexter, who's in her very large black book.
Yes. That was a nice little twist in that scene.
Yes.
I like that because you think, yes, she'd be upset that, Albert's encouraging him to leave, and then she basically pushes him out the door and goes right to the phone. And Jackee is very, very funny in this scene.
She is.
It's the kind of thing where it may not work for, a whole episode, but just her line readings and just, the way she bats her eyelashes and stuff when she wants to, and just the way she says stuff. She owns this character.
Yeah.
It is quite funny.
Coming into watching these, I just had the feeling I wasn't going to enjoy her performance in general and the character, just from what I remembered, and really she's great.
Yeah, and Lori was watching some of the early ones with me a while ago, and what stood out to us was Marla Gibbs' character was actually much more annoying than we expected. There are a lot of times where she can be, she just does things that are just kind of mean, and she just comes off as pretty inconsiderate. Whereas Jackee, I mean, she's could be a selfish character herself, but she came out looking actually quite a bit better, just as a looking at the character. Whereas the Marla Gibbs character is like, wow, she really does some unlikable things, and it's really kind of a pill in a lot of the early episodes, especially.
Yeah, and there's also like not quite a Lucy element, but there is an element of her kind of getting them into jams.
Yeah, or
through her either her like overconfidence or sometimes trying to do the right thing, and just I don't know. She seems to cause a lot of problems.
Yeah, now there's a fine line between helping people and meddling, and she kind of crosses that line a lot. There's an episode I saw where Lester becomes a DJ for a week, and he wins a contest.
DJ, right? Yeah.
Yeah, and she enters him in the contest, but she ends up basically hiring a woman to try to seduce him because she's jealous of like the women calling in. It's not really clear why she lets it go on as long as she does, and Lester gets upset with her.
Yeah.
You know, he gets ticked off, you know,
Yeah.
and deservedly so. You know, it's sort of one of those things where they set up like this thing to be funny, but it really kind of makes Mary look terrible in the end.
Which, to be fair, she was coming from the Norman Lear world of sitcoms where the lead character usually is terrible.
That's true.
And she's certainly not a George Jefferson or a Archie Bunker, but she's far from perfect.
You know, and I do respect her as an actress and what she does in the show. You know, not doing Florence, but being more the center of the show. That can be a thankless task sometimes, but I do think that a lot of times, like, the scripts don't do her many favors.
I don't know, you know, over the course of the show, too, of course, the tension between Sandra and Mary kind of goes down and they actually become friends, which, you know, it makes sense.
That's an excellent point. It seems clear that at the beginning they envisioned Sandra as more of a pure villain, and then they just made her more of the group of friends as the show went on. Like you said, that makes sense, and it worked out better that way. Yeah,
and there's a pretty good episode where her mom visits, and you learn some things about her background. She was a preacher's daughter and always felt outside, like an outcast in her family. And then her mom explains, well, that's who she was before she got married. And so all their attention was because they were similar and not because they were different. And kind of really gives her permission to be who she is. Because she spends the episode kind of pretending to be a goody girl. And then, of course, in her pilot, you get even more layers because suddenly she has to carry the show.
Yeah.
Back in this episode, Mr. Forsythe arrives at Mary's apartment, and he's looked things over and thought about them, and thought about the fact that his father spent more time with Albert than he ever did with his son, and he fires Albert. And no one's there to witness this. So Albert's in a bind. And then he's calling employment agencies and not having any luck. And then he overhears Lester and Mary arguing about, getting rid of him. And they come out. Mary's making Lester do the dirty work. And they come out to do it, and he says he's going to move the love seat or something, and pretends to throw out his back. And he'll be okay after resting for a couple days or maybe a week.
Yeah. This is another way. So in the same episode, Mike, we get, and this is why I'm very grateful to Kevin for suggesting this one, because we get the whole butler theme, which is not quite having existing characters serve as each other's butlers, but it's close enough. Yeah. And you get the old trick back scheme.
Yes.
One of my favorites. He does say that. It's more subtle. I mean, the only thing that would have made it better is if he was kind of groaning and he said, no, this happens this has happened before, and the only thing that will cure it is rest, bed rest for a few days, maybe even a week or longer.
Yeah.
But what we get is pretty good, though.
Yes. Yeah, a couple other things that could have made it better. Him eventually actually throwing out his back.
Yeah, yeah. I thought the next scene, I thought that's what was going to happen, actually.
Yeah. And Mr. Bentley showing up to walk on his back.
Oh, yes. Oh, that would have been classic, yes.
Yeah. I know just the man who can help you. But the next morning, Lester pushes Albert out of the bedroom in a wheelchair. And that's where he says the thing about the couch.
Okay. So presumably Albert maybe he slept on the couch earlier.
Yeah. I think he was thrown on his back doing that. But
yeah.
So I guess Lester and Mary must have slept on the couch. Lester didn't get a lot of sleep. And Lester leaves, and then Mary is like, really, she's being a butler to Albert. She's wheeling him around, and of course he's being a real pain, like asking her to wheel him to the window and wheel him back to the drawing room and then back to the window.
Right, and there's no indication that he's doing this on purpose or for revenge. This is just the way he is. Yes.
Right. And Mary goes in the kitchen, and Alfonso, who we mentioned, the handyman or the super, arrives. He offers to help fix Albert's back. And I did assume he was going to hurt him too.
Yeah, I tell you, unsolicited chiropractic activity is not something that, that's not something you just want to go do to somebody without their permission.
No, and yet on
dives
TV,
right in.
Happens all the time on TV, doesn't it?
Yeah, that's right. It's almost like as many, for every person that has a trick back that acts up, there's somebody that has a remedy for it,
Yeah. So Albert gets upset and stands up, and just as Mary walks back in. And then he has to explain the truth, and we get a little vulnerability too. You know, he's been a butler so long, he's never had anyone do anything for him. And no one even knows his last name, which is Blotchbinder.
Mm.
I find that hard to believe. I mean, if you hire someone, you know their last name. But it's a funny last name, so I'll accept it.
Fair.
And, you know, Mary encourages him to take some chances. And then this episode turns in another way, unexpected way.
It sure does, yes.
So Brenda and Calvin and Manny are teaching him to loosen up. So Calvin walks out and knocks on the door, and Albert opens it and says, "Yo, Master Calvin, what it is?"
Yeah.
"This is the Jenkins crib. There's the den, but chill on in."
Yeah.
And Brenda has to explain, "Oh, it's chill out."
To his credit, he's frustrated because he wants to do better. You know, he's genuinely trying to get this.
Yes. And Manny gives him some shades, and he's kind of strutting around. And
yeah, this is the moment here where the promotional department at NBC is like, okay, we got something we can work with here. You know?
Yes. Yeah.
There had to have been. I would have liked to have heard Danny Dark talk about this episode. You know,
Mm-hmm.
Hey, look who's on 227. Wait a minute, is that And then they show him like strutting across the room with the sunglasses on.
Mary comes in and she's frustrated with it. Tells him to go fix lunch, and he's like, "You got it, Mama."
I laughed at / enjoyed this way more than I probably should have.
That was a great line delivery.
Yeah. This whole thing was hilarious.
And then the last scene, Lester comes home, and Albert is still being cool. And in fact, he's now wearing like full hip hop attire. He's got some sort of Fila sweat jacket and a gold chain and a Kangol hat.
Yeah, see, this show really did have its, fingers on the pulse of urban culture in the,
Yes.
late 80s.
And he steps out, and because Forsyth comes back, and but Albert's, I guess we haven't seen Albert yet. But anyway, Forsyth comes back, and he explains to Mary and Lester that unless Albert remains in his employ, that he won't get any of his inheritance. And then when Albert comes in, he agrees to go back, but he doesn't know why. He just thinks he's got his job back. He's very grateful now to Mary and Lester, and so they say he's welcome anytime as a guest, but then they tell him the truth, and Albert then uses that quite to his advantage and makes Forsyth carry all his bags out. That's pretty much the end of the episode.
Yeah, Mary and Lester are alone at last again.
Yes, until the next person knocks on the door.
Yes.
Yes, Franklin Cover really brought his A game, didn't he?
Yeah, he embraced it.
Yes.
And kind of a nice twist this time. He's the domestic help as opposed to Marla Gibbs being the maid on the Jeffersons. So that was a kind of a nice way to bring him on the show. I got a kick out of that.
I'd like to think that they, that the whole episode mirrored their off-camera relationship. Started out with tension, but by the end,
yes,
she was like, "You can come on my show anytime as a guest."
Yeah.
Maybe he was even involved in coming up with some of this concept. I don't know.
Yeah.
Maybe just somebody watched Mr. Belvedere and thought, that would be a good idea.
Right.
Works for them.
Well, they could have brought Franklin Cover back for more, but instead, no, they had to bring on Barry Sobel, and, which arguably a worse direction than this episode took. But yeah, that fifth season, they were bringing people on, and just the show seemed to be floundering. I haven't revisited or watched much of that.
I didn't watch any of those, but I did read some of the descriptions, and that was enough.
Yeah, that's probably sufficient.
Like, there's like a two-parter where they go out west and tangle with water rustlers. And even in season 4, there's one where Mary and Rose take some fake Girl Scouts, whatever they call it on the show, and capture a killer or something.
Wow.
What?
There's another classic sitcom premise, though, taking some like Boy Scout, Girl Scout group and having to do like an outdoor excursion of some kind.
Yeah, of course. I guess I wonder if Alexandria, the genius girl, must be the scout.
Yeah. I was just trying to think of what excuse they would have for Mary to be a scout leader of some kind.
But like we said, there's a wide range of types of episodes.
There are, yeah. And I sort of talked about those gimmick episodes, but I told you about the Casablanca takeoff, which I really enjoyed that.
Yeah, that was fun. And had at least 2-time guests, Billy D. Williams. I know he was on another episode as himself.
That's right. And they actually made reference to it in that episode, yeah.
Yeah. They have quite a lot of celebrity encounters.
Yeah, I think they also had quite a few Billy D. Williams references too. I think he was one of their go-tos for like, sort of like Mary's Fantasies or something. So just kind of watching episodes for this podcast, I almost got the impression that Billy D. Williams was almost like a regular, with how often he appears and is mentioned. But he makes the most of his appearances, that's for sure.
Oh, he was on the Jeffersons too, wasn't he? As himself.
I don't remember.
I think he was.
Well,
I sort of remember seeing it back then, being excited because Lando was on. Yeah, an episode called Me and Billy D.
Okay.
Season 5. Yeah, and I know I mentioned the Temptations, and I feel like a lot.
Nell Carter.
Okay.
The singing episode.
Yeah, and then sometimes they're just special. Oh, Pee Wee Herman.
Oh, yeah, and
I mean, that's a little weird because he was on as Pee Wee Herman, as if Pee Wee Herman were a real person.
Yeah.
Which I know is part of the gimmick, but
right.
He was a real person, but he also had shows that he was performing in D.C.
And you mentioned a Family Feud episode.
Yes.
Which I did not watch that one, but I do remember the Wheel of Fortune episode they had done too.
Yeah, those have almost the exact same story.
Yeah.
Which is that Mary and Sandra end up auditioning, and the producers enjoy the tension so much that they build a whole show around it. So the feud one is more interesting because it's everyone from the building. They sort of draw straws or draw names from a hat to see who ends up on whose team. Lester ends up on Sandra's team.
Okay.
So there's some extra tension. And then Sandra blows it in fast money.
0
out of 0. 0 out of 0. And Lester doesn't follow his gut. He follows an answer Mary had suggested. And before, when they were talking about the show, she was giving good advice, which is you got to think about what the average person thinks, not you.
Yeah.
But he follows that advice, and of course he gets every number one but that one, and they only get 199 points.
Oh.
Yeah.
Was it Ray Combs or Richard Dawson?
Yeah, it was Ray Combs.
Okay.
They made mention of Richard Dawson.
Okay.
But it was fun. And the Wheel of Fortune one is fun in its own way, too.
Right.
But they should have done a game show episode every season.
Yeah. The annual game show episode.
Yes, the annual game show episode. All right. You have any other thoughts about 227?
I don't think so. I've enjoyed watching it. Like I said, it brings back some memories. It's a solid, entertaining sitcom. And I do think, especially like the first couple seasons are clearly the best when you get the full benefit of the cast. I just kind of like the idea of, these people living in this, DC apartment. And like I mentioned, stoop culture is, something that I enjoy in sitcoms. So yeah, and this episode was, it really took a turn for the wacky, but I enjoyed it.
I did too. And thank you, because I haven't said it. Thank you, Kevin, again for suggesting both the show and the episode.
Yes, and Kevin is, of course, as we mentioned, a friend of the show and is a big supporter of us on social media, especially in our Facebook group. And we'd invite any of our listeners, please come join us on Battle of the Network Shows group on Facebook, and we can talk more about favorite sitcom butlers, favorite sitcom trick backs, all this kind of thing.
And think of it as the BOTNS stoop.
Yeah, I like that.
You can sit on the stoop, or you can hang your head out the window and make all the comments you want.
And you know what? Donuts, crumpets, we don't care. Anything is welcome.
That's right. I've had crumpets.
No, I don't think I have.
Yeah, I have. I mean, I don't know if they're right. My brother bought some once, and we had crumpets. And I mean, they're good. They're good, it's like almost like a English muffin turned inside out. So it's like a thing just to absorb butter.
I see.
But it's no donut.
No.
I'm sorry. English people with your high tea. It's no donut. All right. Well, with that, we'll see you next time.
This episode brought to you by Albert's School for Hip Hop Butlers. Settle back and chill in, homie. This episode also brought to you by Ray's Pinkies. This episode also brought to you by Hand. Join us next time for another exciting episode of Battle of the Network Shows. Learn more, leave feedback, and suggest future episodes at battleofthenetworkshows.com. Follow us on Twitter at BatNetShows and like our Facebook page, facebook.com/Battle of the Network Shows.